Kevin always tried to stay unnoticed. It was easier than facing people like Greg, the school bully. But Kevin's real problem wasn't Greg. It was the fear, the invisible giant that grew inside him every time he felt small. He believed he would never be strong enough, until he heard a story from his grandmother about David and Goliath. That's when Kevin discovered something powerful. Giants can fall. The school hallway felt bigger than Kevin imagined. The white walls and metal lockers gleamed under the fluorescent lights, but to him, none of it felt welcoming. Every step echoed in his mind like he was walking on stage in front of an invisible audience. Deep breath. It's just a new school, he repeated to himself, but the knot in his stomach didn't go away. Kevin had moved to the city with his mom and little sister a few weeks ago. This was the third school he had attended in less than 2 years. The reasons were always the same: new jobs, fresh starts. But Kevin knew better. Deep down, he understood the real reason had another name. Escape. Escape from problems, from stairs, from the invisible giants that seemed to follow him wherever he went. As he walked slowly down the hallway, a burst of laughter echoed louder than the rest of the chatter. A group of students stood near the lockers. In the middle of them was Greg. Kevin didn't need to know anything about Greg to understand the situation. He had seen this type before in every school he attended. Tall, full of confidence, with eyes that saw others as pieces in a game he controlled. Kevin lowered his head and tried to pass unnoticed. But Greg saw him. They always do. "Hey, new kid," Greg called out casually. Kevin hesitated. He thought about pretending not to hear, but his feet stopped. Not because he wanted them to, but because fear froze him in place. Greg stepped forward, and the group stopped laughing. The whole hallway seemed to quiet down. Lost? Kevin raised his head slowly. Just trying to find room 207. Greg smirked, crossing his arms. Room 207? I don't think it's this way. Need some help? Something in his tone made Kevin's stomach tighten even more. "I'm good. I'll figure it out." He tried to sound firm, but even he could hear the tremble in his voice. As Kevin turned to walk away, Greg threw out one last comment. "Hope you can run fast, new kid. Some people here don't forgive mistakes." Greg's laugh boomed behind him. Each step away felt heavier. When Kevin finally entered his classroom, he slid into the last seat by the window. He stared outside at the empty soccer field. Out there, it looked peaceful. But inside him, the giant was already awake. Kevin knew that first day wouldn't be easy. That night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, Kevin wondered if things would ever change. Why does this always happen to me? He wanted to disappear, to not go back to school the next day. But as he lay there, his grandmother's voice echoed softly in his mind, as if she were sitting right beside him. "Kevin, sometimes God places giants in our path to remind us that we're stronger than we think." Kevin sighed, closing his eyes. Maybe his grandmother was right. Maybe there was a way to defeat this giant, even if he didn't know how yet. Mornings at Kevin's house always had a slow rhythm. His mom left early for work, leaving coffee ready and a scribbled note on the table. "Have a great day, Kev. I'm proud of you." Kevin liked reading it, but lately the words didn't feel as strong. He slung his backpack over his shoulder and headed out, but the walk to school felt longer than usual. His feet dragged as if the ground were made of quicksand. The first day had already shown Kevin that Greg wasn't just joking around. At lunch, he overheard the whispers. "The new kid's a loser. He won't even look people in the eye. Bet he doesn't last a week." Kevin tried to ignore it, but it's hard not to hear when you're the target. That day, Kevin felt the weight of each word like stones in his pocket. When he got home, he dropped onto the couch, staring at the ceiling. His 9-year-old sister, Lily, sat on the floor nearby, playing with a puzzle. "What's wrong, Kev?" she asked without looking up. "Nothing." But Lily wasn't so easily fooled. She always seemed to know when something was off. "Was it that Greg guy?" Kevin raised an eyebrow. "How do you know about Greg?" Lily shrugged. "I saw you when you got home. You have problem face." He laughed but quickly stopped. "It's nothing, Lily. I can handle it." "What if you can't?" Kevin looked at her for a moment. She had a way of asking questions that cut through the noise. "I'll handle it." But even he didn't believe the words. Later that evening, during dinner, their grandmother called on video. Kevin's mom propped the phone on the table so everyone could gather around. "Kevin, how's the new school?" His grandmother asked with a warm smile. He hesitated. Lily glanced at him, waiting to hear what he'd say. "It's fine, Grandma. Just getting used to it." His grandmother made a soft sound of disbelief. "Don't try to fool me, Kevin. I know you." Kevin grinned awkwardly. "Listen, Kev." Her voice softened. "You know the story of David and Goliath, right?" "Yeah." "Then you know David wasn't the strongest or most prepared. But he knew he wasn't alone." Kevin poked at his rice. "But I'm not David, Grandma." "Maybe not. But today's giants aren't like the ones back then. They show up in different ways." "Like how?" His grandmother smiled. "Sometimes the giant is fear. Other times it's words. But the secret to defeating a giant hasn't changed." "What's the secret?" "Knowing who you are." David knew. And because of that, he won. Kevin stayed quiet. "Let me tell you something, Kevin," she continued. "Faith doesn't remove the giant. It gives you the courage to face it." After the call, Kevin lay in bed, staring at the stars through his window. Maybe somewhere inside there was a David in him too. Maybe it was time to find out. The cold morning wind brushed against Kevin's face as he walked through the school gates. His steps felt steadier than the day before, but the shadow of what had happened still followed him. Greg wasn't around yet, but Kevin knew it was just a matter of time. He took a deep breath and made his way down the main hallway, repeating his grandmother's words in his head. Faith doesn't remove the giant. It gives you the courage to face it. But was he really ready to face it? During lunch, Kevin sat alone at the far end of the courtyard, watching a basketball game from a distance. He never really got into sports. It was easier to stay out of sight. "Hey, Kevin!" A voice called out, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Noah, a boy from his science class. Short, with curly hair and a backpack that always seemed too full. He had that kind of quiet presence Kevin appreciated. Someone who didn't draw much attention. "Want to eat with us today?" Kevin hesitated. He wanted to say no, but something inside pushed him to accept. Sure. They sat under a tree with 3 other students, Anna, Rachel, and Sam, all part of the science club. Kevin began to relax as they laughed and talked about the upcoming project. But the calm didn't last. From across the courtyard, Greg and his friends appeared. In seconds, Greg's gaze locked onto their table. Kevin felt his heart drop. Greg walked toward them, smiling like he already knew how this was going to play out. "Well, look at that. The new kid made some friends." Greg's voice carried loud enough for nearby tables to turn and watch. The group fell silent. Sam looked down. Rachel pretended not to hear. Kevin felt the heat rising in his face, but he stayed put. Greg stopped beside the table. "So, Kev, how's lunch? Mind if I take some?" Greg reached for Kevin's sandwich. Without thinking, Kevin grabbed Greg's wrist. The entire courtyard seemed to freeze. Kevin didn't know where the courage had come from, but there he was, staring straight at Greg. "Don't touch my food." Greg's eyes narrowed in surprise. Kevin saw a flicker of uncertainty cross his face, but Greg quickly pulled his hand back, smirking. "Relax, new kid. Just messing around." He turned and walked away, but Kevin knew this wasn't over. That night, Kevin told his grandmother what happened. "You grabbed his wrist?" she asked, surprised. "Yeah. And how did you feel after?" Kevin thought for a moment. "I'm not sure. Felt like I knew he couldn't scare me anymore." His grandmother smiled. "That was your first stone, Kevin." "First stone?" David didn't take Saul's sword. He chose 5 smooth stones from the stream. Simple, small. But they were things he knew how to use. You don't need something grand to face your giants. Sometimes all you need is one small stone. Kevin reflected on her words as he stared out his window that night. Maybe his first stone was just saying no, but he knew the battle wasn't over. and Greg, the giant, was still standing. The next few days were strangely quiet. Greg didn't show up during lunch, and he barely looked at Kevin in class. Kevin knew better. Giants don't disappear. They wait. On Friday, the school felt different. There was a basketball game in the afternoon, and most students gathered in the gym. Kevin wasn't a fan of crowds, but Noah convinced him to go. "It's just a game." Noah shrugged. "Since when do you like basketball?" Kevin asked, raising an eyebrow. Noah laughed. "I don't, but I like being around people even less." Kevin smiled. "Fair enough." The gym was packed. The court shone under the lights, and students filled the bleachers with excitement. Kevin and Noah sat near the top, close to the exit. Everything seemed normal until Greg appeared. He was on the court, talking to some of the players, but his eyes quickly found Kevin. This time, Greg didn't look away. Greg started walking up the bleachers, slow and deliberate. With each step he took, the noise in the gym seemed to fade. Kevin tried to ignore it, but it was too late. "Hey, Kevin." Greg stopped a few steps below. His voice was loud enough for others to hear. Noah shifted uncomfortably. "We were just talking about the game, and I thought..." Greg crossed his arms, smirking. "Don't you think courage needs to be proven?" Kevin felt his face heat up. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about a challenge." Greg grinned. "Let's play. You and me." Kevin said nothing. Greg tilted his head. "What's wrong? You scared?" The students nearby started to glance over. Noah leaned in and whispered, "Kev, you don't have to." But Kevin was already standing. "Fine." The gym fell silent. Even Greg seemed surprised. "Really?" Greg arched an eyebrow. Kevin shrugged, but his voice was calm. "Yeah, all right then." Greg smirked as he jogged down to the court. "I'll be waiting." Noah stared at Kevin in disbelief. "Dude, are you crazy?" Kevin laughed nervously, wiping his sweaty palms on his jeans. "Probably. He wasn't good at basketball. But this wasn't about the game. It was about what would happen after." Kevin walked down to the court, the weight of dozens of eyes following him. Greg's group gathered on the sidelines, grinning in anticipation. Greg spun the ball in his hands. "Ready to lose? New kid?" Kevin took a deep breath. "Let's see." The court felt like a battlefield. The game started, and Greg didn't waste time. He dribbled fast, weaving around Kevin with ease. The crowd laughed when Kevin stumbled or missed the ball. But Kevin didn't give up. Every time Greg scored, Kevin stood up again. Every time Greg mocked him, he stayed focused. Greg might have had the ball, but Kevin knew the real victory was standing his ground. After a few minutes, the game ended. The score? It didn't matter. Greg tossed the ball aside, grinning. "That was fun. Thanks, Kev." Kevin nodded, turning to leave the court, but Greg called out, "Hey, Kevin." Kevin paused without turning around. "I didn't think you'd finish the game." Greg hesitated. "That was brave." Kevin gave a slight nod and walked toward the bleachers. Noah was waiting, shaking his head in disbelief. "What just happened?" Kevin smiled. "The second stone." The next morning, Kevin walked into school expecting stares, laughter, or maybe even a new nickname. But to his surprise, nothing. The hallways were normal. Greg passed him during lunch but didn't say a word. No smug comments, just a brief nod, barely noticeable. Kevin paused for a moment, confused. "This feels weird," Kevin muttered to Noah as they sat outside for lunch. Noah shrugged. Maybe he got bored. Kevin doubted it. Greg didn't get bored that easily. But here's what Kevin started to realize. He didn't care anymore. Greg's words still echoed in his mind sometimes, but they didn't carry the same weight. It was as if an invisible wall had formed around Kevin. The words bounced off, but they didn't stick. The real victory hadn't happened on the court. It happened inside him. Later that day, during science class, the teacher asked students to pair up for an experiment. Greg, sitting in the row behind Kevin, didn't move. "Kevin," the teacher called. "Pair up with Greg." Their eyes met. Kevin grabbed his notebook and walked over, sitting next to Greg. The tension was there, but Greg broke the silence first. I didn't know you were that stubborn. Kevin smirked. It's a gift. Greg chuckled, but there was no malice behind it. Why didn't you quit yesterday? Greg asked while filling a test tube. Kevin thought for a moment before answering. Because someone told me the size of the giant doesn't matter. Greg raised an eyebrow. So what matters? Kevin met his gaze. Knowing who you are. Greg didn't say anything right away. He seemed to let the words sink in. I guess that makes sense. They worked on the experiment quietly after that. Not much conversation, but no hostility either. As class ended, Greg stopped at the door. Hey, Kevin. Kevin glanced back. Thanks for not backing down. Kevin nodded. Noah appeared by his side. What did he want? Kevin smiled. I think the giant's starting to fall. The afternoon sun bathed the school's soccer field in warm light. Kevin sat on the bleachers, watching Lily run across the playground with her friends. He liked picking her up after school. It gave him a reason to linger, to let the day settle in his mind. But today wasn't like other days. Greg appeared near the field, casually kicking a rock as he walked. Kevin saw him coming from a distance. For a moment, he wondered if things would go back to how they were. Greg stopped in front of the bleachers. Mind if I sit? Kevin shrugged. Free country. Greg laughed softly and sat beside him. The two sat quietly for a few moments, the sound of kids playing filling the silence between them. I used to sit here after school when I was younger. Greg started, his voice low. It was my way of getting away from stuff. Kevin glanced at him, curious. Getting away from what? Greg's smile faded a little. My older brother. He was tough. Always had to prove he was stronger than me. And Greg hesitated. I guess I copied him. Kevin didn't interrupt. Greg wasn't someone who opened up easily. I thought if I made people feel small, I'd feel bigger. Greg's eyes stayed fixed on the field. Kevin nodded slowly. But it doesn't really work, does it? Greg smirked but didn't deny it. No, it doesn't. He exhaled. You know what's funny? You never backed down. Everyone else just avoided me. But you stayed. Kevin chuckled. Trust me, I thought about running plenty of times. But you didn't. They sat in silence again. But this time it felt different, easier. Why did you pick on me, Greg? Kevin asked, not angrily but curiously. Greg ran his hand through his hair, thinking. I guess I didn't hate you, Kevin. I just didn't like seeing someone have the kind of courage I didn't. Kevin realized something then. Greg's biggest giant wasn't someone else. It was himself. Well, you don't have to prove anything anymore. Kevin stood, stretching. And for what it's worth, I'm not as brave as I seem. Greg grinned. And I'm not as tough as I pretend to be. Lily ran over, her face flushed from running. Kev, ready to go home? Kevin ruffled her hair. Yeah, let's go. Greg stood and nodded to Kevin. Hey, Kevin. Kevin turned. Thanks. Kevin smiled. No problem. As he walked Lily home, Kevin felt lighter, like the weight he had been carrying for so long had finally fallen away. The giant had fallen. The school bell rang, and students flooded the hallways, eager to head home. Kevin closed his locker slowly, watching as the crowd thinned. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't in a rush to leave. Greg wasn't looming over him. The whispers had stopped. The weight he used to carry through these hallways felt lighter. But Kevin noticed something else. Near the edge of the courtyard, he spotted a younger boy, small, thin, and clutching the straps of his backpack tightly. His eyes were glued to the floor, shoulders hunched. Kevin recognized that posture immediately. He had been that boy not long ago. Greg leaned against a nearby wall, scrolling through his phone. Kevin expected him to step in to say something, but Greg just watched, as if waiting to see if someone else would handle it. Kevin sighed quietly. You don't need something grand to face your giants. Sometimes, all you need is one small stone. Kevin approached the boy slowly, crouching down to meet his eye level. Hey, you okay? The boy glanced up nervously, unsure if he should answer. I'm fine. Just waiting for my brother. Kevin smiled. First day? The boy nodded. Yeah, I guess. I know how that feels. Don't worry, it gets easier." The boy gave a shy smile. "Thanks." As Kevin walked away, he caught Greg's eye. Greg gave him a small, approving nod. Kevin smiled back. Maybe that was the next step. Not just facing his own giants, but helping others face theirs. Later that night, during dinner, Kevin told his grandmother about the boy. "Sounds like someone's turning into a David out there." She grinned. Kevin laughed. "I only said a few words. That's how it starts, Kevin. David didn't become king overnight. First, he fought lions, then bears, then Goliath. The small victories prepare us for the big ones." Kevin thought about that for a long moment. Maybe there were more giants ahead, not just for him, but for others. And this time, he didn't feel afraid. He felt ready. Autumn leaves swirled around the schoolyard, painting the ground in shades of gold and red. Kevin sat on a bench, hands tucked into the pockets of his hoodie, watching the wind scatter the leaves. Greg approached from across the field, his pace slower than usual. "You alone today?" Greg asked, sitting down beside him. Kevin nodded. "Just waiting for Lily." Greg leaned back, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "You know, I tried out for the basketball team." Kevin smirked. "Didn't see that coming." "Yeah, well, the coach said I needed to put my energy into something productive." Greg chuckled. Kevin laughed quietly. "Good advice." Greg's smile faded a little. "It's weird, though. People treat me differently now. Not scared, just normal." Kevin nodded. "It's what happens when you stop acting like a giant and start acting like a warrior." Greg raised an eyebrow. "A warrior?" Kevin shrugged. "Yeah, warriors don't need to prove they're strong all the time. They fight when it matters." Greg thought about that. "And you, Kevin? What are you now?" Kevin watched the leaves drifting across the field. "At first, I just wanted to get by. But now, I think I'm a warrior too. I just fight in different ways." Greg smiled, nodding in understanding. "Makes sense." Lily's voice cut through the breeze as she ran toward them, waving. "Kev, let's go home." Kevin stood, tossing his backpack over his shoulder. "Looks like my little warrior's ready to leave." Greg laughed. "See you around, Kevin." Kevin turned to walk away but glanced back. "Hey, Greg." Greg looked up. "Thanks for everything." Greg nodded. "Same to you." As Kevin walked Lily home, the sky began to darken. The wind was colder now, but it felt refreshing. For the first time in a long while, Kevin felt light. The giants weren't gone. But now, Kevin knew he didn't have to fight them alone. And more importantly, he knew that inside everyone, there was a warrior waiting to be awakened. Now tell me, what's the giant that's been holding you back? Is it fear of failure? The weight of others' opinions? Or maybe that voice inside that keeps saying you're not good enough? The truth is, we all face giants. But the real question is, are you going to keep running? Or are you finally ready to stand up? Kevin learned that you don't have to be the strongest. You just need to take the first step. So what about you? When will you throw your first stone? If this story resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us as we uncover how to defeat the giants that stand in our way. Because together, victory is within reach.